Basically, for the beginning of the film, I just wanted to establish sort of where you were and then get you to the tunnel as fast as possible, because that's where the whole film's going to take place. And the way that I figured I'd do that was, I wanted it to feel like when you're watching the film, you know you're going to go on a journey. And so a train leaving the station just seemed like the best way to do that. All of the passengers on the train would sort of symbolise the audience in a way. And that train would eventually meet up with the tunnel that the film takes place in. These shots here, from the train's point of view, they took years for me to do because Amtrak would never ever let me film from the front of the train. And so I ended up sort of bullshitting them and telling them that I'd film some of their work crews for the Amtrak video, and they finally agreed to let me do it. I never ended up actually doing those Amtrak videos. Most of the time when you're filming stuff, you have absolutely no control over what's going to happen. And this is one of those times. You know, I always just felt I'd film Greg walking, and then I'd pan down, and I knew that there was this gate here, and I'd pan down to the gate. I had absolutely no idea that there would be a train going by just at the right moment. And as I'm doing the pan, I can hear the train, and I'm thinking, oh, please don't, you know, screw up the shot. I always thought that I'd pan over and I'd miss the gate completely. And so I was so happy when I got down and I wasn't all, you know, messed up, and I managed to get that shot. It was pure luck, though. Before we actually started filming this, we sort of prepared the tunnel a little bit. We knew we would need electricity, so Henry tapped into these huge boxes underground, and we ran about 40 blocks worth of wire with sockets so we could plug up the lights at any time and any place. Another thing that we did was we built a dolly, and that would allow me to get moving shots through the tunnel. I'd been hanging out in the tunnel for about 3 months before we started filming, and so you get to know what people did before they became homeless. And Henry had worked on the railroad, so I figured he knew quite a lot about tracks, and you know, he'd laid track and he'd done various jobs. And so I asked him how wide the track was. I just sort of threw the question out there, and he said, he gave me an answer. He said, so and so by so and so. So I said, can you build me something that can roll along the track, hold a camera, a couple people, and some lights? And he said, yeah, no problem. And the next day I woke up and came out my house, and I was sort of cleaning my teeth, and I looked down the tunnel and I'd seen a campfire. So I walked down to see who it was and say hello, and it was Henry, and he had been building this dolly, and he had taken the wheels off a shopping cart, and he had taken, you know, pieced together all the plywood, and he'd put in bolts in, and it was amazing. We actually went through about 3 of them, because the first one I think got burnt down. The second one somebody ended up using for their house, and I felt, you know, bad asking them to move. But the third one was, you know, the master dolly.
You adjust. You'll be surprised what the human mind and the human body can adjust to.
For titles, I always knew I wanted like a graffiti font, but I wanted it to animate, and I also wanted it unlike anything I'd seen before. And so I called up a friend of mine who was teaching at Cooper Union in New York. It's like a school for art. And I asked her if she knew of any of her students, or if she had known of any students that would be interested in doing the typography on a film, but they had to be special. They had to sort of be a little bit better than the rest. And she introduced me to a guy by the name of Jay Hillier, and he did all the titles in the film. He also ended up doing the website, and it was brilliant. It was the first time he ever had done titles, and he really did a fantastic job. Same with the website. He'd never actually done a website before he did the site for Dark Days, and he read a book and did the site from the book. And I really liked that. It was almost the same spirit as this film was made in, because none of us had a clue what we were doing when we made this film. We just sort of winged it.
Oh, early.
I gotta take a fucking
Good morning, people.
Good morning,
Here we're in Ralph's house, and at the time, I was staying in Ralph's house too. And so for about a month, there was Ralph on the bed, Tito on the floor, and then me next to Tito by the door. And the dog used to sleep underneath Ralph's bed. So there's 4 of us living in this little house for about a month. They liked to stick me by the door because they knew I was the most afraid of rats. And there was just one rat that was trying to get in the house. He was trying, every night he'd dig a little further, and you know, his hole was getting bigger and bigger. And they'd always say, oh, the rat's not going to bother you, you know, the dog's in the house. And I'd always say, yeah, but, you know, the rat's going to jump on me before he realises there is a dog in the house.
Scared that, not scared, just looking at this goddamn place and shit. I said, yeah. And at that time, only that came down here just to get out the public eyesight. But as I looked around and shit and started noticing shit, I started building and shit, man. And that shit just became into like a little project. At first, I took it as a little camp, 2 weeks. And then this fucker became like home. After I started building, found, you know, stuff that I can use, clothes, TVs, lamps, got power. That camping shit that went right away. Left right out my goddamn mind and shit. You know what I'm saying? And look at me now, I've been down here for fucking 5 years, going on 6.
This whole beginning here, where you're basically going into different people's houses and they're talking about their houses and sort of how they feel about the tunnel. You know, when I first went in there and I'd see different people and see how they lived and what they had done for themselves, I had a huge respect for everybody, because, you know, I'd start thinking, if I was in that position and if I was on the street, would I have done the same thing? Would I have built myself this house and taken care of myself like this? Or would I have ended up, you know, talking to myself walking down the street? And these people hadn't done that. They hadn't felt sorry for themselves. And they had, like, made something and made the best out of a bad situation. Because it's a lot harder to fight than it is to give up, I think. And I like to think that I would have built the house, but you just don't know until you're in that situation. And here I was sort of seeing all these guys, and they had done that for themselves. And some of them had done the most amazing jobs.
Fixing the door, always the door. If not the inside door, the outside door. Working on the roof, making a trap door to get out and escape, come in. Putting a window in, and he take the window out, you know. All kinds of stuff. He even had a ladder in here. Oh, a ladder, yeah.
Yeah, I know, I took it out.
Yeah. And he used to go straight up to the roof. Yeah. Then he was putting a balcony up there, and he changed his mind. He's the only one I ever see working on their house. Everybody else, like, they just...
Everybody's house was always in a constant state of improvement. I mean, any spare bit of time they had, they would generally, not everybody, but almost everybody, they'd be generally adding on stuff or taking away stuff or trying new things and building stuff. Because you could. I mean, like I say, you were really only limited by yourself and what you found on the street. And you could really find everything on the street that you needed.
Well, maybe a year longer than I have.
You know, like a lot of my friends, you know, a lot of my fellas come down here. It's like my boy came down last night to visit me. We brought one of his boys from school down here. He'd never been down here. The kid liked to shit on himself when he came in and saw the place and shit.
Well, hey, that ain't no help to you. Well, you feel good about it, I guess, you know. He think you're living outside and ain't outside as he think, you know, make you feel a little better, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You ain't much trouble as he thought he was when he walking down the track.
Yep.
Yeah.
The relationship that Tommy had with Henry was very interesting, because Henry was like a father figure to Tommy. I mean, anything that ever went wrong with Tommy, Henry would be the first person that he would go to. Like if his electricity went out and it was 2 o'clock in the morning, he could go to Henry and ask Henry if he would, you know, help him fix it. Or if he had a problem about something that he wanted to talk to somebody about, Henry would normally be the first person that he would go to. Henry's probably the most honest person I've ever met in my life. He's really like straight talker and he's no bullshit whatsoever. And I think Tommy liked that. Whether he agreed with him or not, he kind of had a respect for Henry that he didn't have for many other people.
Down here in this fucking dump and shit, man. Let's face it, man. I mean, like, down here, didn't have to pay no bills, no nothing. Look at me, I'm shaving I'm using Power Red Light. I ain't even got to pay motherfucking bills and shit. I mean, that's part of comfortability and shit, you know what I'm saying? Turn the TV on, leave TV on all night. I ain't got to worry about paying the car there, you know? That's fucked up, but that's one of the reasons how I got so comfortable and shit, you know? In the wintertime, I don't freeze. Summertime, I don't burn up. You know? All thing you don't got down here is running water. And we did have that down here, believe it or not, at one time. We had running water. Of course I got fucking comfortable, man. I got too goddamn comfortable. That's why I'm really pissed off at myself, man. 'Cause I don't like lost 5-6 years of my motherfucking life being down in this motherfucker. Man, I get ready to make me some money, man. I got to get paid. Got to make that almighty dollar.
All of this stuff was shot really simply. I mean, I'm sitting with the camera, there's a sound guy, somebody holding the mic, you know, to one side of me, and the other side of me was somebody holding a light. And if there was no room, as in this case, there's no room for somebody to hold a light, we just clamped it wherever we could. It could be on a piece of wood, we'd stick it on the floor. You know, it really didn't matter as long as it was pointing at whatever we wanted to film. And we really had no idea if any of this was even going to come out. I remember going and sitting in the lab and I'd shot maybe, you know, 40 or 50,000 feet of film, which is, I don't know, 20 hours worth of film before we even developed it. And we all sat there in the screening room, and when it came out, we couldn't believe that it even came out. It was brilliant.
That's right. If you notice, they the biggest ones, and they're gonna motherfucking kids. That's right. Edie Media fucking money. You understand what I'm saying? And the reason why I'm saying this, because each one of them fucking cards contains something. And what's that something? Money.
Ronnie's a funny guy. He's one of the funniest guys I met. He had all these carts, and you could take away every one of his carts, and he'd go out that night and come back with 5 of them full up again. One time we were on the street and he had stopped on the side of the road, and a cop came by and sort of jokingly said, if you're going to park that thing, you better put a quarter in the meter, because we're going to give you a ticket. And he actually, a lot of people were upset with him in the tunnel, because near the entrances of the tunnel, Ronnie would have carts lined up at every single entrance. You know, there'd be a big mess and it would draw attention, but he didn't care. He'd be happy actually if they took away all his stuff. It would be doing him a favour.
Portable televisions like this, you know what I'm saying? I found that. Heaters like this, you know what I'm saying? Now I don't sell everything. Stuff that I can use, I keep. But stuff that I can't use, I sell. You know? Everything you got that you paid for, I can, 9 times out of 10, I will go out there and find it, and it be in perfect working condition. And I sells it. You know? That's the name of the game. Hustling. I'm a hustler, bro. I get paid.
I put in the sign, there's no crack. Because they be knocking on my house sometimes, and they want to borrow a stick. And I don't smoke crack no more. But you know.
For the beginning of the film, I just sort of wanted to show people where you were and sort of show where people were living and what they had done for themselves. And now was a time when I had to sort of turn it around and show how people got there and sort of what their pasts were. And drugs is a large part of many people's past. And so this is when we started talking a little bit more about that.
Around me every time, and I let people smoke in my house, then I'm gonna want to get the urge. It's bad enough that sometimes I started crack already for a long time, for more than 3 years now. And sometimes I wake up with the urge. And I haven't done it for more than 3 years. And sometimes I still wake up with the urge to smoke it, but I fight it. And then I'm going to have these people knocking on my house, talking about if I got a stim or they could they go inside and smoke. You know, that shit is going to fuck me all up again. So I said, well, let me go ahead and put a sign so that way these assholes could read it. And don't knock.
Do like you do sometimes. Heat it up a little bit. You know, you're so wasting it, you know. Just heat it up a little bit.
To me, crack is just the worst drug ever to hit the earth. It ruined more people's lives than I think any other drug.
Okay, this is one of the things I keep myself a little safer than what supposed to be down here. But I usually set up this trap with these pans and everything over here. Simply put a pan like that, put a little pencil underneath it, so it'll roll if somebody does come by. Put it like that, make sure it's on there.
A lot of times I get asked if it was dangerous in the tunnel, and I always say no, and I still feel that it wasn't dangerous. The only thing I think that was a little dangerous about it was the fact that it was so dark and you were so isolated. So if anything did happen, you were pretty much on your own. And so people a lot of the times would feel the need to set up sort of alarm systems and more warning systems for themselves. And it was never for the other people living in the tunnel, because everybody kind of knew everybody. So nobody was expecting anybody that was living around them to do anything. They were purely for people that didn't live in the tunnel, that may be walking through or maybe passing through. So it wasn't that it was because the tunnel was so dangerous. It was more just because you really didn't know who was going to be walking through there.
When you walk by it, you know, you trip the trap, make all that noise.
Damn, y'all still here? Hey, but y'all must want to hang out with me or something. Bet. Y'all think y'all can keep up? Come on. Because I'm getting ready to get paid about right now. I ain't trying to hear it. I'm getting ready to go out and make me some money. I bet y'all come back with $10. I'm going to get paid. Ain't no doubt about it.
%80 of the population down here is crackheads. And that might be an understatement. Might be a little more than that. It's really bad, you know, because they smoke this shit and they get so hooked up on it, you know, they just lose sight of reality. They don't take care of themselves. Half of them don't wash their ass, you know, and they're always on some bullshit, you know, where they always think that somebody's out to get them and stuff like that. It's really fucked up, you know. I've seen guys...
This next scene of Tommy walking down the track, it was one of those times where I was, I was just really happy that we had the dolly to work with, because you could never get that. And it really showed more of the scope of, where he was. Not that you can see anything behind him, but just the fact that he's got to walk down this track with his cart put you a little bit more in the environment.
I was sitting in the room and shit, and then they called me over to the room, and they told me, you want to get high? You want some crack? And I said, nah, I tried that shit. That shit don't do nothing to me. So they said, well, try this. So what they did was that they put res. They cooked it up and they put res, and then they put crack on top of the res. Yeah. So I didn't know anything about that shit. And when I smoked that shit fucking rocked my fucking legs, man. Wow. And how my shit is like, I like to OD. I like to almost OD on.
Here Ralph's talking about the first time he used drugs and what it did to him and his ex-wife, who kicked him out because of his drug use. And one time we were sitting up in the street and we saw his ex-wife, and he hadn't seen her for years and years and years and years. And he said, that's my ex-wife, that's my ex-wife. And he said, I'm going to go and say hello to her, I'm going to go and say hello to her. And he did, he went up and said hello, and she just looked at him like he was a ghost and kind of freaked out and stormed off. And I'll never forget that. he wanted to talk to her and he wanted to sort of say, I'm changed and I'm sorry, but when she saw him, she only saw, you know, the way that he left her, you know, and all the trouble that he was going through and all the problems that that brought. For about a week after that, he was really sad. It sort of brought him back to how bad he really was when he was using drugs and before he became homeless.
Either the drugs or me, and I kept staying hard, but I kept fucking going back to the drugs. One day when I went home, man, my clothes was all packed, man.
You know, today is a fucked up day and shit, man. But this dumpster is empty right now. Ain't shit in here. This shit used to be stacked up to the top with garbage. I used to be walking around the edge of this shit, number of garbage. I spent about 45 minutes trying to go through all this bullshit in here. Right here, ain't shit in here today. Nothing. Nothing but garbage. About this spot? What did you say about this spot?
This spot here, there's always a lot of plastic. There's never really been very many cans here. It's always been a lot of plastic stuff. I used to get like, I'm usually less than I get five. I used to get like $3 or $4 worth of cans.
He's been out on the street quite a long time, Tommy, over 10 years. So, you know, you do learn the ropes. And what he would do is he'd have certain supers. Tommy would help the super bring up the garbage. And in return, that super would allow Tommy to go through the garbage and sort out the cans. So what would happen is each day Tommy had a few different buildings that he could go to. And if you did it like that and you were smart and you went to those buildings every day, if you rack up 4 or 5 or 6 buildings that allow you to do that, you can make some pretty good money every day. What sells the best?
What sells the best? Nasty movies. Nasty faggot movies, boy movies. Them dicks be slanging and shit, them faggots be gathering around there, they be mugging you for that shit, man.
This was a great scene, Greg going in the garbage. It's a very funny scene, and I have a couple of gay friends that I did show the film to, and at this point they were in hysterics on the floor. It kind of made me laugh at that. But when you put this in front of an audience, and the first few times we started seeing it in front of an audience, it's an interesting thing to watch when, you know, some people do really want to laugh, but they don't laugh because it's, you know, politically incorrect, or it's really interesting. But there will always be one person that just does sort of let it go and laugh and doesn't really mind about offending anybody. And that's always great, I think, you know, when people can really just react the way that they want to react and not worry.
Yeah, anyway, but it'll get better. It definitely will pick up. You know what I'm saying? By the end of the day, how much do you have?
Well, usually on Fridays, if I work all day, about $70, 60 or 70 bucks. Have enough to play around a little bit, you know what I'm saying? Stinking rich. I call it being crackhead rich for the day. You know what I'm saying? Because I got enough money to go out there, you know, to basically what I want to do for a day or two. You know, it gets me through the weekend. I usually take Saturdays and Sundays off and chill. You know.
This scene here was supposed to make it to the film. There was a scene where he went down to try and cash in all his cans, and I'd filmed Tommy down there, and he got in a huge fight with somebody. It was a great sort of scene, and it sort of really said a lot about him. But technically there were problems. There was this snowy, bad, weird effect on the film that had happened at the lab, and I could never use it. But it took me the entire time, in fact up to the night before I went to the negative colour, to make that decision that I couldn't use it. I even had 2 discs, and when I walked there I went, use this one. And I really wanted the scene in there because structurally it took you to a point where it really made you curious about Tommy. You really wanted to know more about him, and that scene sort of made it peak. And then the next time you saw him, he'd be coming back from work and he'd start telling the story about his family. And so I was always really disappointed when that scene couldn't get in there, because I didn't feel that what I had to replace it with took you to that point quite as much. The interesting thing about Tommy is his whole time in the tunnel, he was constantly trying to recreate a family environment. Other people wouldn't really care, but Tommy was really always wanted to organise big Thanksgiving dinners, big Christmas dinners. He really loved that everybody get together and sort of family unit. I felt quite sad for him a lot of times.
All right. Here goes the egg.
What do you make it?
Cornbread. Country cornbread. Here's go the meal. There's a little water.
How did you learn to make that?
Well, when you're from the country, you learn how to raise it.
You know, a lot of times filming, I couldn't even see what I was filming most of the time. In fact, probably about 90% of the time. For the first 5 or 10 seconds of turning on the camera, I could see everything in that frame. But after a while, that my eyepiece would fog up, and I really couldn't see anything. And so people would ask me after I finished the end of shooting, you know, how did it look? And I really wouldn't have a clue. I'd say, I really don't know. And this was one of those times. I never saw this shadow on the wall. I mean, I had no idea that that was there. All I could barely do was make out the top of Henry's head. And I thought, well, as long as I keep that at the top of the frame, I'm going to be okay. And I can hear everything that's going on. And so it wasn't until we got into editing and we started looking at the footage that I saw this shadow. But I have no idea how I did it, and even now looking back, I can't remember. Henry's house had certain bits of wood sort of hanging off the ceiling and bits of old pipe and stuff, so we would just clip the light wherever we could clip the light. And there was a lot of times along the way where things happened that we had absolutely no control over, and they just worked out. I mean, it just was, I was really fortunate. We'd say it all the time as well, we'd say, you know, the force is with us. Because too many things happen like that that were just, I couldn't have made it happen if I would have wanted it to happen.
Considered grow down here. Because if you're homeless on the street, some of them have just what they got in their arm, the little pack on their back. If they get caught in the rain, they ain't got shit. Just like simple as that. So if you're homeless, this is the best spot. You got a door with a lock on it. You got a Frigidaire. Well, you come in and suggest what you want to eat, because you got somewhere to cook it, you can go buy it. Time I think they's done, I took the top off and let them brown. Now ain't gonna do much brown with that top on them. You got a TV. Up top, if you see a TV, you're peeping in the store window. You know, so that's like, well, you're like growing down here compared to being homeless anyway, you know.
Yeah. These are my doggies. This is Ladybug, the mommy. I've had her for about 4 years. And these are her little kids. This is her little boy. This is Junior. And the other two are little girls. This is Princess. She has a bad leg. She once fell off the roof.
The original format is 16mm, which is a square format. This is more of a 35mm format, which is rectangle, so it chops off a lot of the top and the bottom of the frame. And a lot of these shots, I feel, you know, they don't look as good as what they should look like because it's cropped.
About 14 months older.
This is my pet, my first one. Roger. Tammy brought this one to me, you know, and he's real cool. You know, he's a lazy cat, but a pretty one, you know. You know,
Eats rats.
yeah, no, he does, but he really don't. But Rusty does. Mr. Rusty over here.
Eats Martians.
Oh, there goes the mouse.
Yeah.
Rusty does eat rats.
This was an interesting scene to film with Julio and Lee because they were absolutely tanked when me and Ralph went in there to film them. I mean, they were so drunk, so drunk. And Julio's got a tiny little house. So I'm facing Julio and Ralph is facing Lee. And my knees are already in my chest and so is Ralph's, and all four of us have got our toes touching each other. It was tiny, and you know, I'm resting the camera on my shoulder. At the time it didn't seem like it was that funny. I mean, they were really drunk and we must have been in there for about an hour and a half or 2 hours filming. Lee even threw up a few times, and I found that funny because he's throwing up and Ralph's sitting opposite him, you know. So Ralph's catching the brunt of that, and I could like lean over to the left-hand side. You know, we walked out of there and we were just beaten up from that shoot. I mean, it was really like an hour and a half of, I don't know what it was, but I remember we both sort of washed our hands and said goodnight and went to bed.
Who told me to get a dog? The motherfucker that stole my TV and shit. That's the motherfucker that made me get a dog.
Then we got the most famous gerbil, Miss Peaches.
Peaches.
Yeah, she had 12 kids, man. Peaches had 12 kids. She was all right, man. Miss Peaches was all right.
What did she do with the kids?
She, 4 of them died, and she ate the rest of them, man.
And it's so interesting as well because I see different things in it every time. Like when Julio's talking about the gerbil's mum eating the kids, if you look at Lee, you see he starts crunching his teeth. And I never saw that until we actually screened the film with an audience. And I'd watched this scene hundreds of times and never saw it. Lots of little details like that that you don't see, or I never saw, until I actually watched the film on a large screen. Not only is it a very funny scene, but it says a lot. I mean, and also Lee, unfortunately, he died during the time that we were filming. So it's, for me, it's special that he's in the film. It's also got something really human about this whole scene that I just love.
Was the best, man. You know, not the best, but close to it. Cause Roger was.
Come on. Don't start your shit. Hey, come here. What I told you about that, huh? I told you about your bullshit. Get the fuck over there. You can wait. Get over there. You can wait till they eat. Asshole. Come here, Bugs.
It's all, I always felt it was nice that when you saw something that made you really laugh, what was beautiful about it with this film was that it made you forget that you were watching somebody that's homeless. You stopped looking at them like a homeless person and started looking at them like they were a person. And that was very important. But it was also very important to sort of bring it back to where this is actually taking place. So after every funny scene, I kind of like to put something that would remind you of where you were, with scenes that were a little bit more serious. This shot, funnily enough, we shot in the daytime. That Empire State Building, that was just my cinematography there. Made it look like it was nighttime. I had no idea that, it was a mistake. But it worked out quite well because we used it at night. But it was like early in the morning. It was, we got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and drove to Brooklyn and got that shot.
I had some problems with a fella, and he threatened to burn my house down. But I didn't believe him.
I was fast asleep when Dee's house caught on fire, and Henry came and woke me up. He was banging on the door. I think I was crashing at Ralph's house at the time, and he, was shouting, "You got to get up! You got to get up! Dee's house is on fire! Grab the cameras!" And he really sort of woke us all up. And I always kept magazines of film loaded because you never knew what was going to happen. Most of the time, the equipment was set up, so we grabbed the cameras and ran down the track, and I started filming. And the firemen really didn't like the fact that I was there. They were shouting at me to stop filming. I don't think it's because they didn't want to be on film. I just think I was pretty close to the fire, and they thought if I got hurt, it wouldn't be a good thing. So I filmed as long as I could, and then moved away from the fire. Then we got some lights, and we started filming other people around watching.
That can happen to anybody. But that's one of the things you got to go through living in the street. You know what I'm saying? It bees their way. You're on your own down here, man. You're on your own. But you can't run to the police, because the police gonna tell you, fuck out of here. You know what I'm saying? They ain't gonna be, they'll listen and don't listen, man. You know what I'm saying? And plus, what police gonna come all the way down here in this motherfucking tunnel just to investigate a guy?
There was probably a fire every month or every other month in the tunnel. And it was always very, very sad because a lot of times I would forget that these guys are homeless. Because I'd walk around and I'd go into people's houses and they have a TV and a couch and a fridge and VCR and all of the other things and all of these little amenities. And also I'm not looking at them like a homeless person. I'm just looking at them like my friends. They just happen to be homeless. And so you'd sort of forget that a lot, and you'd forget that all of this stuff was built by hand, and everything that person has is something that they found in the street. It wasn't something that they bought. They had to look for it and then lug it down into the tunnel. And so when there was a fire, especially when Dee's house burnt down, I really saw that she lost everything at that point, and she really had nowhere to go, and she was really homeless. It was very, very sad. But it was at times like that that everybody else in the tunnel sort of pulled together and came together as a community. Now, at this time, I had a production house that was doubling as my own house that was built for the purpose of everybody to get together and sort of talk about the film. And I gave that to Dee. I said, you know, have this house. And she didn't like where I'd built the house, and she didn't much care for the house either. So we broke down the house, and she took the wood, and we moved it to a location that she wanted to build her new house. And in the meantime, she stayed with Ralph. Ralph was like that. If anybody had a problem in the tunnel, they'd go to Ralph for all kinds of stuff. You know, Ralph could have 1 can of soup in his cupboard, and somebody would knock on the door and say they're hungry, and he'd give them the soup, and he'd go in the garbage. And I saw him do that more than once. I mean, he really was, and still is, you know, one of the nicest guys I've ever met.
I told you, I just take the spaghetti and put the top on it and just go like that. It's simple, man. Instead of going through all that.
Yeah, well, you cook different from I do. I you know.
I mean, we're homeless people.
Yeah, but we homeless people. I mean, but if you know how to cook right.
This was a nice shot to get. I didn't know these people. I was sort of using a long lens in a park and filming various people without them knowing I was filming them, just to sort of get some street shots. And here I got really lucky because these gratings in the park, sort of you could look down into the tunnel, and this lady and a kid, you know, heard a train and immediately looked down into the grating. And I just thought that was a great way of getting from above ground to underground.
Come on out there. Come on out there. There you go. That's on out there. Olive oil. Right.
No, it's not that.
Yeah,
It's not that.
Then what is
It's that if you're gonna come and you're gonna drink out the fucking cup, right? And then you're gonna lay the cup there, and then you're gonna go out, and then the cup is gonna be there, dirty, all goddamn for 2 days, then I'm gonna throw it out.
I bet you didn't do that to your wife, did you?
No, I didn't do it to her because she would have kicked my ass.
Yeah, she would have kicked that ass, boy.
But I have to do it now because of the situation that we live. If you leave shit on the floor, what happens? What will happen? No.
A lot of times when I'm filming, my biggest problem, surprisingly enough, in the tunnel was that a lot of things were very, very funny. And so when I'm filming, I just had to try and keep the camera as steady as I could, because I'd end up laughing and the camera would end up shaking a lot. And, you know, a lot of footage I couldn't use because technically it just wasn't good enough. And a lot of times during that time, that was because I was shaking the camera because I was laughing so much.
McDonald's, man. It was no damn McDonald's. It was not no McDonald's. McDonald's don't even have cups like that.
I know, you got the last one.
No, right. Yeah, I didn't get no last one. They don't even have cups like that. They have Pepsi on the side, because I got the top to it. You know, it's got the straw to it, and got the cap to the straw. Now,
whoever gave it a cup went to McDonald's, got the cup, wrapped it up, and said, "Hey, baby, here."
Yeah,
you know,
right.
I got
My
this
friend
like
don't
from
do no
Spain or
shit
some
like
shit.
that.
Well,
my friend don't do no shit like that.
Well, I don't know. What I know is that if that dirty stuff here, and it's not clean.
God damn. So where you hide all that shit at? Keep it in my food bucket. Got a couple food buckets. Keep it in your food bucket. So where you put your pots and shit at? Where you see them at?
My bad. I mean, I understand the situation, but check it out, my brother. Shit ain't that motherfucking rough.
Clarence didn't have any electricity in his house. He also didn't have a roof and didn't have a door and didn't have, you know, all of the basic stuff. And he'd been there for about 8 years at this point. And when I brought the lights into his house, it was actually the first time he'd seen his house properly. You know, any other time he'd seen his house, it was all candles. And the first thing he did was he started cleaning. It was like an instant reaction to start cleaning it up. The next time I went round to his house and filmed him, we turned on the lights and it was all clean. So he cleaned it up in that meantime. But he'd never seen his house with that much light before.
Hey, listen. If the dog is outside, the rats is in here, how the hell the dog is gonna...
The dog, why do you think the dog, when he roughing out there like that, to keep from coming in here?
Roughing that way, and they're coming into this way. So
yeah, I ain't seen no rat up in here. I ain't seen no rat up in here.
Hey, put it this way. You lost the cup.
even me, I'm a damn fool. I sit here and battle with the motherfucker like I was an asshole last night and shit, man. That motherfucker woke me out last night, man. I mean, I'm thinking I'm getting this one and shit, another one zooming by. Shoot. You know what I'm saying? I was trying to get inside this. I mean, they looking right at me and shit and jumping and shit. But I almost caught one of them motherfuckers last night. As soon as he jumped, bam! I didn't hit him directly on this motherfucker head. But that motherfucker went away. I know he didn't come back last night for no more. He said, fuck that, he had enough. But he went and told his relatives. Tell you, man, I couldn't sleep at all last night. Shit. But it ain't gonna be like that shit tonight. It might be like that tonight, but I know they gonna be full tonight.
Like I can't get rid of this motherfucker. Damn, got to clean up behind him. What's not do me? He don't bring no company with him either. He by himself. Motherfucker. Every time I see this motherfucker, that make me have a worse night's sleep. Because I know he in here and I know he walk at night. He walk at night and I try to sleep at night. So me and him ain't gonna make it with that kind of shit. I hope this may make him go under my bed door, but I'm gonna put that light out. I hope he come back and check his house out then, and the food I have for him, and then I got something for his ass then.
I'm back now. I'm cooking him something to eat, man. I'm tired of them taking my shit. Keep telling them, man, they ain't got to take it and shit. Just ask me for it and shit, you know? I fix you a meal. And I'm definitely gonna fix him something to eat. I'm gonna fix him a good meal. After this, they ain't gonna want no more. They ain't gonna want nothing else to eat after this. Cause I don't put sausages and oatmeal. I don't put the topping on top of it and shit. Once I put that on top of it and shit, all they gonna want is water. What is that? It's poison. Shit. I got some wise ass rats out there. Give them a pack of this. Pack of this and keep them away, you know? Once I mix this all up and shit.
Filming the rats was interesting because, I mean, the rats were everywhere. When you're walking down the track, you know, you had rats walking over your feet. Sometimes there'd be droves of them coming across the track, and you literally had to stop and let them pass before you could continue. They'd run next to you, and they weren't afraid of you either. I mean, if you had food, they'd come right up to you and stand on their back legs and sort of squeak, as if you were supposed to give them some food. I shit myself from the rats. I never was scared of the people, but in the beginning I was really scared of the rats. I'd be jumping on people's cookers, I'd be jumping on people just to get away from if I saw one in a house. It just freaked me out. So I always assumed they'd be very, very easy to film. I thought, well, you know, we just walk out into the tracks and stick a camera and boom, I've got some of the best rat footage ever shot. And the first time we tried to film them, there wasn't one rat. And as soon as we turned off all the lights, there's 1,000,001 rats. And that happened every time. And when we throw cheese out on the track, nothing. They wouldn't even bother with it. In the course of a year, I may have tried 20 or 30 times and I just never got one decent shot. I'd get a little one sort of run in and out of the frame, but nothing like it was when you didn't have the lights on. So then one night, I think it was Henry or someone is walking down the tunnel and they got a few bottles of this drink called Yoplait, which is like a yogurt drink. And they opened one up and drank it and they didn't like it, or it was bad or something like that, and they just chucked it on the track. And then within seconds, there's like 1,000 rats around this Yoplait, fighting and squeaking and just going nuts trying to get it. And the rats are coming from all different directions too. So that was it. I knew that we'd sort of found something special to film these things. So I asked somebody to go up and buy, you know, 5 or 6 bottles of this stuff. I said, come on, let's get some lights going, let's get the camera ready. And when he came back down, we chucked this Yoplait all over the tracks, everywhere. I mean, it was so bad. It was so many rats that I had to get Henry to sort of stand behind me to stop rats from coming between my legs when I was filming, because he knew I'd jump and I'd ruin the shot.
I can't believe this shit, yo. Oh, no doubt. Right. 8.5 months. No doubt, cuz. Too long. 8.5. Too long. What's that? Oh, shit.
Here's another one of those times when the only thing that I really had to worry about was keeping the camera steady, because I was laughing and it was very, very funny. Because he just turned around and said, I need a haircut, and she like jumped up volunteering to cut his hair. And he was a little bit paranoid, he was actually. You know, put a razor in Dee's hands and let her shave his head. He was all nervous. Gets out of me, don't leave the room. This pipe was just sort of conveniently located next to Tommy's house. But it was freezing water, and it would only ever work, you know, when it rained in the street, because it's kind of drain runoff, really. And the more it rained, the harder the water would fall. And during the winter time, the tunnel was always about 10 degrees colder than the surface, so sometimes it was just unbelievable. Sometimes it would completely freeze as well. It would be a massive iceberg. I lasted about 5 seconds. And that was it.
You know, hey, what you expect with 4 dogs, man? Especially growing, you know, growing puppies, shit a lot. It's like I remember back when I just had ladybugs. Never got like this. Never. Feels good, doesn't it?
Oh, it feels good, but it's fucking cold.
I just speed up, so
Holy shit.
welcome back to the shit, right?
You're not going to stop doing anything until you're ready to stop.
So what, you think it's about time for you to stop?
No, when I get good and ready, I'm going to stop.
And when is that?
When? I don't know. It could stop me.
So that's the problem. It could stop you instead of you stopping it.
Yeah, but still in all. But I don't like to be
I
pushy.
was smoking crack and I stopped.
But if you smoking reefer,
I smoke reefer, but
well,
I don't
all right,
smoke crack.
But regardless, it's still a narcotic.
It's a difference.
When I first started hanging out in the street, and I'd see people doing different things and hurting themselves in different ways, I tried to get involved and try and stop that person from doing it. Especially when I'd see people using crack and smoking crack. I'd always say, you know, why don't you try and quit that? Why don't you try and get off it? I'll help you get off it. But what I found that did is that alienated me from each of the people. Like, I find people would not want to talk about it in front of me because they knew I'd go into sort of like a lecture and ask them, you know, when are they going to quit? Or they tell me, they come up and say, yeah, you know, I've stopped smoking, when we both know, you know, damn well that they're still smoking. And so after a little while, I learned that you can't get involved in that way. If somebody wants to stop and they want to come to you for help, then they'll do that. But if not, you just don't get involved. And so I stopped it, and my relationship with the people automatically went back to being a lot more honest. But for Ralph, it was a different story, because Ralph had been through that. You know, crack was what led him to the street and sort of destroyed his life. And he kicked it on the street and come out the other end. So when Ralph would talk to people that were using it, was very, very different than if I was doing it. Because he could say, you know, when are you going to quit that shit, man? I mean, you don't need to be doing that. And I know what you're going through because I've been there. And he really had been there. And so it was very, very different when Ralph would say stuff to people.
And still got more punishment to come. Because I've done so much shit wrong. I mean, I've done a lot of things wrong. A lot. You get to the point where sometimes I feel like crying. You know? Sometimes I feel like crying. Something like... Because it was that I was so damn selfish with myself. With everybody around me, it was all about me. I didn't care about what anybody thought, you know. I was fucked up. I went to jail. I got caught robbing. I went to jail, let's say, today. Yesterday, my daughter was born.
A lot of times people felt like they were being punished. They had done wrong previously before becoming homeless, and now they were being punished for it. And it was a never-ending punishment because they never were going to sort of get out of homelessness, and so they were continually being punished. And everybody felt that way. I didn't meet too many people that didn't feel that they were being punished for something that they had done. The other thing about the tunnel is you have a lot of time to think, because most of the time you are on your own and you are very isolated, and so you have a chance to go over everything you did, and everything that you did wrong you sort of dwell on, and you'd go over in your head and over in your head. And so you kind of live with stuff even if it happened 10 or 15 years ago, because your life kind of comes to an end when you become homeless, and you're living in the past because you really don't have too much of a future. And it really affects people. It really plays on people's minds.
Instead of, you know, being in jail and doing what I was doing, robbing and doing everything I was doing, you know, I wasn't taking care of her.
A lot of times during the screenings or after screenings, people will come up to me and they'll say, you know, how could you just stand there and watch Dee pull that big couch and just stand there filming? You know, how come you didn't get involved and help her carry the couch? And to be honest, what happened, I want to get the shot and I want to film, but like 2 minutes after I stopped filming, she's screaming at me, you know, why aren't I putting down the camera and helping her with the couch? So, you know, I would hear it and I would have to help. There were a lot of different entrances to the tunnel. I always felt a little bit bad that I never showed a few more of them. There was a reason for it. See, the goal of the film was that we'd make this film and the money would sort of get everybody out of the tunnel. But I knew that that might take a long time to do. And so what I didn't want to happen was, you know, the film would come out and then the authorities and all different people would see where the tunnel was and how to get in there. And then it might cause an eviction if they didn't know about it, or it might cause the police to come down, and you know, if everybody had to leave, they'd get scattered and then it would be very hard to track down, and it could just cause a lot of problems. So I always opted that I would never show the entrance, or if I did show entrances, it would be confusing where other people couldn't see it or wouldn't know how to find it. It wasn't until everybody got out that I decided, you know, yes, I should start filming, you know, how to get in and out of the tunnel. But by that time it was a bit too late, because either Amtrak had started bricking up or padlocking entrances, and it just wasn't the same way as when they were living there free to move around.
You know, because I never ate eggplant in my life, and I mean, I thought that was some weird shit, you know. When you know, when people talk eggplant, who the hell eats that shit, you know? But it was good, and I always order that every chance I get.
Nah, I don't know what that is. I don't like that. I only eat what I'm familiar with. See all this other stuff that I ain't never seen before. See?
Whenever we filmed in the tunnel, everybody did the same thing and everybody felt comfortable doing whatever they do in front of others because everyone's in the same boat, and so nobody ever felt self-conscious. But when you move out into the street and you start filming stuff upstairs, it creates a lot of attention and it draws a lot of attention. And the thing was, you know, Greg would go into the garbage to get his food almost every night, and as would almost everybody else. And the general public would walk past them and completely ignore them when they were doing it. They'd never stop and watch them doing that. And so when we started filming people in the street, as soon as you add a camera and lights to the equation, people stop and they want to look. A lot of times it would make everybody very, very self-conscious about what they were doing. They would feel very embarrassed about it, and sometimes it would cause arguments. I mean, after the scene you just saw with Greg, he ended up almost getting into a fight with some of the people watching because he didn't feel that they would be watching if there wasn't a camera there.
And these are today's donuts. You want one?
Yeah.
They're good, man.
They're good, yeah.
They're fucking good. They're my favorite.
They are good.
Where?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
All right.
thanks. What's these motherfuckers in here, man?
All right.
Fucking hell, I'm gonna eat these motherfuckers.
I'm gonna eat these too. Maybe a container of milk.
Fucking hell.
Maybe 2 containers of milk.
There you go, there's that yo play I was talking about. Ratissimus.
Yo, Brian, that motherfucker stinks, man.
Wash your fucking ass, man.
No, if you wash your fucking ass, man. Dump it, man. Dump it.
I was in jail, and it had came on the news that 2 kids had got burnt in the fire. My 2 sons, you know.
I always knew about these kids. I'd sat down with Dee, when we first met each other, we sort of talked about it, and she'd tell me what had happened to her kids. But she would never ever let me film her talking about her kids. I don't know if she felt more vulnerable with the camera there, or she felt that she was opening up a lot more. But I could never get her to do it. And there was a time that me and Dee fell out. We had a big argument over something, and we didn't talk for a number of months. I mean, we would just sort of walk by each other on the track and not say anything to each other. Maybe after about 4 or 5 months, we made up. And, you know, we gave each other a big hug, and we were talking, and this was the first thing that I filmed her doing after we had made up. She said that she would talk about her kids.
Sending them off to school. They get the education they need.
It was very necessary that I filmed her talking about it, because it was a way of going a bit deeper. Because when you see Dee smoking and you see her doing different things, you're automatically judging her. But you have no idea what her background is. You have no idea where she came from and what she's been through in her life. And the same with anybody out on the street, and anybody in general. And so it was very important that I filmed that. And she finally said, yeah. This scene here of Dee smoking is probably one of the most powerful pieces in the whole film. The way it comes together is when somebody smokes crack, they normally just constantly smoke. It's not like a relaxed thing. It's like they just smoke and they smoke and they smoke. So I wanted that to come across. And I'd said that to Melissa. That's kind of how I wanted it cut. And I'd gone to sleep on the couch, and when I woke up, this is what she had come up with. And it's probably one of the best pieces of editing I've ever seen. It really just, it got the point across. And for me, it, you know, it really summed up just everything, not just about Dee, but just summed up almost the whole tunnel experience. It sort of just left you a little bit numb.
When they woke me up, man, they had their guns and everything, you know, and it's like, what the fuck, you know? Because it took me time, you know, to get ready, you know, put my shoes on, you know, because I sleep comfortable in there, right? Take my socks off.
Police had never come down into the tunnel. I never ever saw a cop, and I always felt completely at ease that they would never come down there. I mean, sometimes if somebody did have a warrant out for them, we'd see parole sitting on top of the tunnel, but they would never come in the tunnel to get the guy out. But then all of a sudden, one day, there's like 30 cops in there with bulletproof vests and riot gear and telling everyone they got 30 days to pack up and get out. The choices that they gave people were like, you go to the shelter or you go back on the street, and if you don't like either one of those, you're going to jail. And there were people that were in that tunnel that were pretty sick. They had certain health problems, and it wasn't the tunnel that caused it. It was old age, or it was just being on the street for that long. And if anything, the tunnel was prolonging their life because they had a fairly normal environment they could live in. And we knew if they got back on the street, if they were sent out to the street, they'd die. And so it was a really difficult time. You know, there was a few weeks where the tunnel was dark. I tell you, it felt like it got a hell of a lot darker. And for me, the lady captain in charge of the whole thing was really tough, and she really didn't like me. She took a massive disliking to me. So bad, in fact, that I thought, you know, if I ever step foot in that tunnel again, and she's there, I'm finished.
Well, they said they're going to try to get us housing or a shelter or something else. I don't know what that something else is. I don't want to go to a shelter because I don't want to worry about them stealing my shit. They're going to steal all my clothes. They're going to steal everything I got. Drugs is infected with drugs. What they should do is leave us down here. That's what they should do. Leave us down here until they get housing. And when they get housing, they'll ship us out. But not just take us out of here
I mean, we're over here down here, you know, by ourselves, my friend, like family, all right? Now you're gonna break up the whole family, all right? Huh? And it's not worth it, man. It's not fair to us. I mean, they gotta have something at least, you know, if you're gonna construct down here, okay, put some of us to work, you know? Huh? Or for us to get something out of it, because this has been our home for over 3 years. For me, imagine all the people that have been down here for 20 years. I got three words for whoever's fucking idea this was, okay? And it's not I love you. It's leave us alone.
People residing in the tunnel are experiencing a lot of health difficulties.
I always felt sorry for Rich Rebell. He wasn't at Amtrak at the time when the police came in the tunnel and got hired shortly thereafter to try and straighten out the mess that they'd gotten themselves into. So I always felt he got lumped into this situation through no fault of his own. And I'd asked to film Amtrak for months and they just kept refusing me and said no, 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 no. So finally when Rich got hired, he said that, yeah, you know, you can come and film me. And so I always felt a little bit bad for him that, you know, when people watch the film, he catches the brunt. He's representing Amtrak, and so people sort of look at him a certain way, but he's actually a nice guy that just got put in an unfortunate position.
It is absolutely a dangerous, horrendous living situation.
Oh, this needs pretty good. I ain't gonna say like it ain't right. This tastes pretty good.
Oh, okay.
While you smiling though, you better be thinking about why we're going to get out of this motherfucker. Maybe they're cooking over.
I'd probably go back on the east side.
It was actually even a little bit difficult to film people at this point, because the next 2 or 3 weeks were a really, really uneasy time because people really didn't know what was going to happen. What was the most scary was that it was really going to be like becoming homeless again. Everyone in the tunnel was homeless, but they had built themselves or found for themselves and created for themselves a sort of comfortable space within a very bad situation. And so now it was going to get taken away from them and they were going to go back to exactly where they started.
Well, being homeless, it's all types of problems. You never know what lies ahead. So until it comes, then you deal with it. You can't plan shit being really homeless. You know what I'm saying? You can't plan shit. You know what I'm saying? You can say, yeah, well, I'm going home to go to sleep. They fuck around and get there and that motherfucker's gone.
Yeah, your home is gone, yeah.
Yeah, you can put more
Yeah,
water.
I remember that happened to us. Yeah.
So it's very hard to plan. So what you got to do is deal with day by day.
Yeah, well, when you used to sleep on the sleep upstairs, when they were going home to go to sleep, our home was gone.
I was go down to 28th Street to the church and let them sign us up in the Y. But I ain't going in no shelter.
Y'all signed up someplace.
Shelter's out.
What?
Shelter's out.
Fortunately, at this time, there was a lady in the tunnel called Margaret Morton. And Margaret has been sort of working with the homeless in New York since the early 80s. Brilliant woman. She really sort of helped a lot of people. But because of her involvement, she's worked with the Coalition for the Homeless for a number of years. So she suggested that we go to Mary Brosnahan, who's the executive director, and try and get them to put an injunction on Amtrak so they couldn't evict. And we knew it wouldn't stop an eviction, but we did hope that it would buy us a little bit of time. And in that time, we could figure out what we were going to do. So Margaret was really the one that got all of the ball rolling, and really, if it wasn't for her, I don't think anyone would have got out. I was always afraid that people wouldn't understand what was happening here because, you know, when all this came about and we found out about the vouchers and we found out all of these different things could happen, you know, I stopped filming for about 10 months just to do the social work, because it was really Margaret and I were the only two people in the tunnel doing it. We had a lot of support from the outside. We had the coalition and various other organisations, but we were the only two people in the tunnel. And so I really didn't shoot that much of stuff. It was really just more about getting people out and doing that social work. So when it came time to editing, I really saw that we didn't have the footage and we didn't have enough stuff. So I always felt that we pulled this part out of thin air. And so in screenings and stuff, I was always a little nervous that people wouldn't get it. They wouldn't understand exactly how it all came about. You know, I did my best with newspapers and bits and pieces, and because it all happened so quickly, and in the film it looks like it happened overnight, and it really did. It was like 1 minute they're getting kicked out on the street, the next minute they're going to get housing. Hopefully people kind of understand, or if they watch it a second time, understand how it really came about.
And on our part, I think on Civil Liberties' part, we were pretty confident how we had to go to court. We would have won. It was crystal clear, a violation of people's rights, but we didn't want to defend people to live on the street. We wanted to get them into housing. That was the ultimate goal. And we're glad I didn't have to go to court.
All right, you ready? Go!
We're out of here! We're out of here!
It's hard to believe it's our last day in this place. Right? I thought this day would never come.
For me, this is probably one of the happiest times. It was definitely the happiest time for me in the tunnel, and it was without a doubt the thing that I enjoyed filming the most out of everything. Because this is really what it's all about. I mean, for if you're on the street, the only thing you dream about is an apartment. And here it was that everyone was going to get one. And so it really was the most amazing time. It didn't matter if the person was 20 years old or 65 years old. They could do anything at that point. And there was like a new enthusiasm and a new life coming back, where before it's just like everybody was dying. And here it was like they've been given a second chance. And it was just amazing.
What were you talking about? You gonna jump? Oh yeah, got a job coming up, $8.50 an hour, working at King State in the Bronx. That's all right, cuz I'm gonna blow you out the water once I get this mountain bike and start working this messenger job. Cook. Start making like 7 or 8 meals a week. What you gonna do then, huh? Hey, enough to pay the rent, enough to help out with food. No doubt. Oh man, once we start these jobs, though, ain't gonna be no more fried chicken and shit like that. It's gonna be straight up steaks, filet mignon, and all kinds of good shit every night. No doubt. We're gonna gain about 400 pounds a piece, eh? Got some good memories here too. In New York.
You gonna miss it?
Sometimes.
Definitely gonna miss it.
Not bad enough to come back though. Just gonna miss the freedom down here. All the this is mine and I can do whatever I want to with it. Because in an apartment you can't do that. That's all right. What's next?
Just have you sign some of these things. This white piece of paper is is proof that you're actually homeless.
And I loved it. I loved it, tearing down those houses. It was symbolic and it just was special. Because it is the most beautiful thing that could ever have happened to people. It's just fucking amazing. I mean, I don't think I'll ever see anything as beautiful as this until I have kids, probably. I mean, that's the only time that I think I could see something that is really, you know, that special. To see someone get an apartment after living that long inside a tunnel, some people as long as 20 years, 25 years, really was, I can't really say enough about it, because nothing I'm saying at the moment feels like it's doing it any justice. But this really is like the American dream, I mean, and it really happened, and it's never ever happened before in the history of homelessness that an entire community has been given and offered housing. The other thing that's quite special about it is this was the oldest and longest running homeless community in New York City, and so it was also quite symbolic that the last one was the one that people were offered housing.
Once I get it together the way I want it, there's eventually going to be a nice new set of furniture going around. You know, I'm hoping to get like these corner couches. You know what I'm talking about, right? The kind of sectionals. Like this is one sectional here, as you can see. But what I want to do is get a matching sectional that goes all the way around like this. And eventually I'm going to get a new entertainment center. As you can see right now, I'm just making do with a bookshelf. But I'm hoping to eventually get an new entertainment center to put on this wall.
I had no idea what the title was going to be for this film. I had absolutely no idea whatsoever. And we were making lists and lists of just the most atrocious titles you ever heard. Pages of just crap. I was getting very worried about it because we were getting close to editing and close to everything and no title. And one day I'm sitting in the editing room and Melissa's playing around with this section of the film and she says, "I've got it, this is it, this is the title." So I say to her, "What are you talking about?" And she goes, "Listen." And she gets this scene back. And she goes, "Listen to what he's saying." And I say, "What are you talking about?" So she gets the film back and she goes, "Listen." And that's when I heard Greg say, you know, those were some dark days. And that was it. That was the title of the film. And I love it because it comes at the end of the film, and so it sort of brings it to a close and it rounds it all off. And also, you know, compared to all the other shit that we were coming up with, this was really a godsend. This was another one of those things that sort of you have no control of, but you're so fortunate that it happened.
But it be that way, you know. You don't realize it until you get out of it, and then, you know, you'll drift back every now and then. No matter the drift. And you say, "Damn, I used to do that. That used to be me." You say, "Oh, no way." Yeah, it used to be me. It definitely used to be me.
To me, it's like it never happened at all. And it never will happen again. Ever, 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 never, ever happen. I will never go homeless again. That was like a nightmare. You know, and I walked up out of it. And I'm staying awake. I'm serious. I don't want that shit. I don't need it. I'd rather stay working and, you know, doing good. I don't want to be homeless no more.
I always loved this last shot for an ending. I just thought it kind of summed up everything, the whole film and the whole experience, and you know, it was a good way to take a deep breath and call it a day.